The transport ship was a relic, groaning through a sector of space forgotten by most. Its sole occupant, a human, moved through the dim corridors with the quiet competence of one used to being alone. His name was Arlen, and he was a tender of machines, a mender of broken things. The ship's distress signal had been weak, a ghost on the scan, but his code said to answer. He expected a blown conduit, a failed life support module. He did not expect the war, that it was etched into the hull of the elegant vessel, now cradled in his cargo bay, a once magnificent cruiser now scorched black and bleeding atmosphere. The markings were alien, but the language of violence was universal. He found her in the ruined command nexus, a figure of silver and cobalt slumped against a shattered console, a pool of iridescent, violet-tinged blood slowly spreading beneath her. She was alive, but barely. Her form was tall, slender, with skin that held a faint pearlescent sheen, even in the emergency lights. The intricate armor she wore was not metal, but something organic and crystalline, now fractured over her left side. Through the cracks, the wound pulsed slowly. Arlen did not hesitate. He knelt, his medkit clicking open. He worked with gentle, practiced hands, first using a sealant spray to stem the external bleeding. The substance hissed against her strange biology, but it held. Her eyes, large and amethyst-colored, flickered open. They held no fear, only a profound, weary depth of pain and a shock of surprise. "Be still," he said, his voice low and calm. "The bleeding is stopping, but the internal damage is significant. I have a tissue knitter, but it's calibrated for human physiology. I will need to adapt it." He worked as he spoke, adjusting settings on the small device, his fingers careful as he peeled back the torn edges of her armor to expose the injury. The skin beneath was cool, the violet blood flowing slower now. The tissue knitter hummed, its tiny lights blinking as it scanned, recalibrated, and began its work, stitching torn fibers back together at a cellular level. It was an intimate process, requiring physical contact, a guiding of the device over the ravaged flesh. She watched him, her breathing shallow. The pain must have been immense, but she made no sound. Her gaze was fixed on his face, on the utterly mundane concentration there. As his fingers, steady and sure, brushed against her side while positioning the knitter, she spoke. Her voice was a whisper, thin as cracked glass. Yet it carried a weight that seemed to still the very air in the wrecked chamber. "Do you realize?" She breathed, each word an effort. "You are touching the queen of the galaxy, human." Arlen's hands did not falter. He finished a pass with the knitter before he looked up, meeting those ancient, pained eyes. He saw the expectation there, the assumption of awe, of recoil, of immediate prostration. He simply nodded, his expression unchanged. "I did not," he said quietly. "But it does not change the wound. Or the work. Please try not to speak. Your thoracic membrane is only half repaired." He returned his focus to the knitter. The queen stared. In all her long cycles of rule, across 10,000 systems, no being had ever heard that title and responded with such mundane practicality. There was no disbelief, no groveling, no sudden terror. There was only the continued, gentle pressure of his hand and the hum of the medical device. It was, in its own way, the most disorienting moment of the entire ambush, the one act her assassins had failed to achieve. It stripped her, momentarily, of all context. Here, in this metal tomb, she was not the sovereign of the celestial compact. She was a patient. He was a healer. Hours passed in the quiet gloom. Arlen worked tirelessly, monitoring her vitals on his scanner, administering a broad-spectrum antibiotic he hoped her system would tolerate, fashioning a support for her broken arm from spare parts. He brought water, helping her sip. He spoke little, only brief, necessary words. This will cool the inflammation. Your biosigns are stabilizing. Rest now. Finally, he sat back on his heels, the knitter powering down. The immediate danger is past, he announced. The knitter has done what it can. You will need proper rest and your own physicians, but you will live. The queen, propped up on a makeshift pallet of insulation blankets, studied him. The pain had receded to a dull roar, allowing clarity to return. You are not what I expected, she said, her voice stronger. People rarely are, Arlen replied, beginning to clean his tools. My attackers, she began, the memory tightening her jaw. They were of the Cathar ascendancy. They seek my throne. They believe my compassion is a weakness to be exploited. Arlen listened, wiping a smudge of sealant from his fingers. They shot your ship. They tried to end your life. That is not a debate on policy. That is an act of cowardice. You are not afraid? She asked. Aiding me marks you. The Cathar will consider you an enemy. He looked around at the rusting walls of his own ship, at the simple, functional tools of his trade. I tend to broken things. That is all I have ever done. If they come because I mended a life, then their definition of enemy is flawed. A strange sensation, unfamiliar and warm, bloomed in her chest. It was not the tissue knitter. It was the absence of something she had lived with. For so long she had forgotten its weight, the isolation of command. Everyone saw the crown. This human, in his profound simplicity, had seen only the wound. What is your name? She asked, Arlen. I have no title to offer you that would not insult this moment, Arlen, she said. So I offer only my thanks. He gave a small, acknowledging nod. You are welcome. The silence that followed was comfortable. He brought her a nutrient bar from his stores. It was bland, utilitarian. She ate it without complaint. He told her of his work, of drifting between the less traveled lanes, fixing what others left behind. She told him of the compact, not as a ruler, but as someone describing a vast, complex, and often fragile machine. He understood machines. When the first compact warship, a sleek leviathan of polished alloy, hailed them 2 days later, its thunderous presence filling the view screen, Arlen showed no more reaction than he had to a faulty thruster. He opened a channel, gave coordinates, and said, The patient is stable, ready for transfer. A delegation of glittering, anxious officials and severe physicians boarded his humble ship. They found their sovereign resting in the cargo bay, surrounded by spare parts and lubricant canisters. They fell into deep bows, their faces etched with terror and relief. She rose, and the mantle of queenship settled back upon her shoulders as visibly as a cloak. Her bearing changed, her expression becoming regal and remote. She turned to Arlen, who stood quietly to the side. The officials looked at him, this simple human in stained work clothes, with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. The queen spoke, and her voice was now the voice that convened star systems. This human, she declared, the words ringing in the metal space, has shown a loyalty purer than any oath sworn in my halls. He faced the darkness of the void and the threat of a galactic power with no weapon but compassion. Remember his face. He walks under my eternal protection. Any debt owed by the compact is owed to him. The officials bowed toward Arlen now, shallow, confused bows. He looked uncomfortable as she was escorted to the gleaming shuttle. She paused one last time before him. The officials looked away, granting a semblance of privacy. For a second, the regal mask softened. You tended my wounds, she said quietly. For his ears alone. You needed tending, he replied. The galaxy is vast and wounded, Arlen, she whispered. Its mechanisms are failing. Would you consider tending to a larger machine? He met her gaze, saw the queen, but also remembered the wounded being in the dark. He saw not an offer of a palace title, but a request for a mechanic. "I would need the right tools," he said finally. A true smile, the first, touched her lips. "They will be provided." The Queen of the Galaxy left the broken transport ship. Arlen stayed, already running a diagnostic on a slightly stressed power coupling from the recent activity. The warship escorted him to the nearest starbase, where a fleet of engineers fell over themselves to upgrade every system on his vessel at the Sovereign's command. He accepted the upgrades with gratitude, for a good mechanic values good tools. But when they offered him a suite of plasma cannons, he declined. When they suggested a crew, he refused. When they presented him with a uniform of a high imperial tender, he asked instead for a reinforced set of his usual work clothes. The story spread, of course. How the Queen had been saved by a human who showed no awe, only care. It was told in throne rooms and bars, often with exaggeration. But at its heart, it was a simple story. And in the vast, wounded machine of the galaxy, a simple human with gentle hands and a quiet code began his new work. He traveled not on a rusty transport, but on a well-equipped mender ship, its hull plain, its purpose clear. His first official dispatch, a request for parts, was signed not with a title, but with a phrase that would become known across 1,000 worlds. A phrase that spoke of a power far greater than any weapon dot. It was signed simply, "The Tender."